Hello, and welcome back to the Long Distance Love Bombs podcast. I am your host, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, and my guest today is my pal, Caleb Campbell. He's been on the podcast before. If you have missed those conversations, the brief summary is that Caleb is such a dude. This guy was a West Point graduate, professional NFL player, went and lived in a Canadian basement for multiple years, having a midlife crisis of sorts, has come out the other side, is a very well-known keynote speaker, just an awesome man. And in this one, we're doing things differently because he and I had a wild idea to dive deep into parenthood. Dad's diving deep. And in this conversation, it's just Caleb and I with a couple of surprise secret questions diving into the idea of grief, and specifically the way that grief shows up in parenthood, the ways that you can navigate grief, identify grief, name it, work through it, share it. And we talk about all of the blessings that a grief practice and a grief ritual can provide. We also talk about the idea that grief is a skill that can be honed and practiced through time. And so we're trying something different. We had the idea to do an entirely new podcast, to just choose a specific topic each week and interrogate it with levity and experience. So let us know what you think. Did you like this? Was it good? Did it help you? Do you have any ideas for future podcasts? Let me know. And as usual, I've included links in the show notes for you to get into Caleb Campbell's world. There's also, what else is there? A book or two. So check that out. You can find ways to link up with me, work with me, walk with me in Spain for 10 days this summer. And that's that. But so here is a conversation with me and Caleb all about grief. And it is fun. It is vulnerable. It is tender. It is enlightening. And we quote various poets at different parts. You're going to enjoy it. Get a notepad, a long drive, dive in and dive deep with us. Thanks for being here and enjoy this conversation with Caleb Campbell. This is it. This is how we do it. Caleb Campbell, g'day. Welcome.
Sir, it is so great to be with you.
You just called me all natural and organic. And then
when I think about you, that's what I would say. You're like all natural and organic. You're really, really healthy for the body and for the soul. You know? Like that's you to a T.
I just
I'm over
picture
here
like a
has sugar.
No way, bro. I picture you're like a former professional athlete. Like you're like you're like in a, what's the word? Like those giant bulls that roam the prairies. They're just like looking like a boss.
Buffalo?
Yeah, like a buffalo. That's
A
you.
buffalo. I'll take a buffalo, because buffaloes, when the storm come, they go into the storms. Did you know that the cows run from the storms? But buffaloes go into the storms knowing that if they go into the storms, they'll emerge out on the other side and they'll be safe.
Bro, I just love you. I love that we could start a podcast talking shit about, and then you're like, actually, I have some very deep philosophical point to make right now that I think might benefit you.
Man. But on another note, on the athlete note, I literally just for lunch had a bowl of Kashi cereal where I dumped 40 grams of protein into the milk.
My guy.
So yeah, athlete to a T.
Okay, hard transition. Caleb
Hard.
Campbell, this is the first conversation, perhaps of more. We'll see. But this is a little experiment for us because we were jamming the other day, catching up, swapping stories as pals do. And the idea came about to start a podcast called Dad's Going Deep, with us just diving into parenthood and fatherhood and all the nitty gritty shadow stuff. And then I think we both realized, hey, we're pretty busy and starting a new podcast might take some time and energy that we don't have. So why don't we just actually try a couple and see what the response is like before we begin a new empire. So today we have decided to talk about grief as a topic. Is there anything that you want to say in terms of prefacing the audience for this conversation? Did I adequately summarize
No, I
that?
think you did a great job. It was very organic and natural.
Actually, I have a question for you before we dive in.
Yeah.
When we talked about that idea of dads going deep,
Mm-hmm.
why
Dads
were
dive
you
deep.
dads
3
dive?
D.
Okay, dads dive. Sorry, 4-letter D word. Dads dive deep. So why did that idea sort of whisper to you? Like, what called to you about that? Like, why did that
Yeah.
excite you?
One, I think there is just a love that I have when I do have a chance to have a conversation with you. And so talking about a topic that is relevant to both of us as now you've entered into fatherhood, I just thought that why not? That would be so much fun. And then secondly, I just feel like it's probably a conversations that should be had more often, normalizing the things in fatherhood that aren't necessarily normalized, maybe, or having the conversations where maybe we can say the things that are being left unsaid so that, any dads who do happen to listen to this, they just will better understand how they can show up as a whole father, right? How they can do their own work and show up as a whole father. I would have never really obviously cared about listening to any of this before I had a child or before I became a father. But then once you become a father, something happens, right? Like all of the things that didn't matter to you suddenly matter because it's going to, directly affect your children or indirectly affect your children. And so, I don't know. I just think there's a great opportunity for us to have some really candid, transparent, vulnerable conversations about the landscape of fatherhood and allow our words to become a permission slip, maybe for other fathers to step into the next evolution of fatherhood for them that they're being called into.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I would just expand that to parenthood as a
Yeah,
whole, because I
absolutely.
feel like it's relevant to everyone who's parenting a child. And I think we connected because it was like, yo, do you feel this? Do you think about this stuff?
Yeah.
Because the fact that I haven't seen this sort of out in the zeitgeist much leads me to believe that I am weird, wrong, doing it badly, missing something. And then you're like, oh, yeah, bro. And most of the men that I've talked to, the people I've reached out to, kind of shake their head and they're like, oh, yeah, man, like, welcome to parenthood. I'm like, why
Yeah.
is nobody talking about this stuff? Like, I've never heard
Yes.
anybody write about this or talk about this. It's like this secret little handshake, and the universe just gives it to you with like a 2x4 to your soul. It's like,
Yep.
yo, someone give me a heads up.
Man.
So I've prepared 2 secret questions for you about grief that
Oh,
I haven't told you. And so I just thought we could use those periodically if we hit a roadblock, which I don't think we will because we're
no.
great and we're very communicative.
Very
Uh,
communicative. Wait, are you going to tell me
do
the questions or are you just going to throw them out there if there's an awkward silence?
you want me to just start with one right now?
Oh, give me one. Give me a good question
Yeah.
here.
Do you want number 1 or number 2? Okay, question 2. I'm just making this up off the top of my head. Question 2 is, what has surprised you about the grief that's been present since you have children now? Like,
I have two.
so the premise underlying all of this is, hey, kids arrive in your life and yeah, it's great and it's rainbow sprinkles and sunshine and your heart's just living outside your body and you'll never feel a love like this ever. And it's like, yeah, and there's some darkness that arrives too. So what has surprised you about the grief that has entered?
Yeah, it's a good question. What has surprised me about the grief that has entered? I feel like the grief that entered after my first child, Sophie, who's turning 3 in a couple of weeks, and then the grief that kind of entered after my second child, Rune, my son, was born, were It was a little bit different. I remember like some of the grief that I felt when Sophie first arrived. What had surprised me the most about it is I think I wasn't ready to. I think you actually. I just was on your Instagram page, trying to get a feel with where you're at and what you've been talking about. But you had said it. But I wasn't ready to really be prepared to miss my wife the way that I miss her, and the way that I did miss her. Like I really was not prepared for that, and there was such a deep grief around the loss of the way that we did life, right? And I think I wasn't just ready for that. I was very focused on this new life that is gifting us with her presence, and which is good and great. And that grief of missing my wife and missing the way that we had connected previously is still something that surfaces. The other night, I feel like once we had our daughter, every night when I crawl into bed and we're in bed together, and we've had like a long day, I will always just wrap my foot around Kara's foot and nothing needs to be said, right? But that's just like her knowing, hey, I'm here. Like we're still intertwined. We're doing this dance together. You're exhausted. I'm tired. But hey, we're not alone. And that's all I do. And I think that has become like a little ritual that we do almost every single night just to remind us in the busyness and the chaos of it all, that we're still in this dance together. And then secondly, the grief that I feel like that really came into my life, which I would say became a catalyst to me doing a lot of inner child work, was when my son was born. I was less focused on my son and I was more focused on my daughter feeling less special. Like I was kind of like so afraid that once Varun arrived and he started to get mom's attention and my attention, that she would seem, or she would think, or she would feel less special, right? And eventually you start to realize that having children is just one big fucking mirror. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about her feeling less special, but I was in a transition in my life and I was being asked to let go of some things. And that little boy, Caleb, in me was just so desperate, like deathly afraid of losing this specialness that he had been clinging to for the majority of his life. And so I just remember this profound grief that came out of left fucking field around this loss of specialness, or the potential loss of specialness that my daughter might feel as my son entered into the world. And that was deeply surprising.
So like that you feared that you would be less special, but then we're
Yeah, because
projecting onto your daughter.
Yeah, so I was being asked to, I could feel the invitations that were being extended to me in the season of life that I was in, as I was trying to really embody and integrate this new expression that I felt like was moving through me. For that expression to make its way through me, like I was needing to let go of some parts of my story, some parts of my life that I didn't even know I was clinging to. But whenever I acknowledged it and I did some parts work and I had acknowledged it, I realized that, oh my God, I am still drawing so much of this false sense of specialness from these parts of my psyche, from these parts of my story. And I was so deathly afraid of letting it go that I was playing out this situation in real time with my daughter, thinking my daughter is going to lose her specialness. Right. And my daughter she has no idea. She's not feeling that at all. Right. She's if she feels less special, she lets us know like real quick. But it was just like this moment of realizing that it was projection. Like I was fully projecting this whole story. And gratefully, I have a beautiful, wise spouse that could help me see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just picture you like walking up to your daughter and like getting on your knees with tear-filled eyes and being, you're so special. Don't ever think you're not special. And she's just like, yo, can we get an ice cream? Like, I'm good. Like, thanks, Dad. I'm fine.
Yeah.
You're like, you're just falling apart. You're like, oh, hang on. There's a
falling
mismatch.
apart. Yeah. So I would say that was just like a dance with grief that I was not prepared for necessarily, because it wasn't like the typical grief that usually comes with like the loss of social interactions, the loss of running as fast as you were once running, giving up, just some parts of your routine maybe, or, parts of your story that you really love. Like I just wasn't expecting that grief to surface, this loss of specialness.
Yeah. When you said that I think you said like that you missed your your partner,
Mhm.
something like that. I definitely relate to that. And that's been a common thing that's come up with Kendra and I's, and that has sort of sideswiped me. Like I wasn't prepared. I didn't realize how much I would miss my partner despite spending more time together
Yeah,
than we had in
absolutely.
years. You know, it's like
Yeah.
for that first month or so, it's like we're together all the time, essentially, except
Mhm.
for some walks here and there, some errands, and yet to be so close and so connected on this new and exciting transformative journey, but then at the same time to feel like distant and sad and angsty, and I call them the wah-wahs when I'm just like wah wah, and it's like I don't know what's going on here. I just feel off, or I'm grumpy, I'm short, I'm irritable,
Yeah.
and I thought, oh, I'm just not sleeping that well, or oh, there's a lot going on, and oh, the labor really took it out of you, and we haven't integrated any of that stuff. And after a couple of weeks of this stuff, it kind of hit me one day, like, oh, like, you're grieving, bro. Like
Mhm.
you miss your partner, you miss the old you, you miss the
Mhm.
life you used to have, you miss Sundays where you could just look at your calendar and be like, well, I got nothing planned. What should we do today, lover? And you're missing freedom, and you're
Yeah.
missing the lack of responsibility that you now have, and you're missing laying around in bed and like having a conversation with your partner that doesn't
Netflix.
involve
Uninterrupted Netflix.
you're missing Netflix, bro. Oh, you're missing reading books. You're missing like all of it, just all of it. And that is something that has come to a head a couple of different times.
Yeah.
And I think Kendra would openly share that she's had a couple tender moments
Mhm.
of being teary and being like, I miss you. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I miss you too. We've definitely come together a couple times just crying. Like, I miss you
Yeah.
too. And it's like I've seen you every hour for the last 3 weeks, but like I
Yeah.
miss you. And I miss us is another phrase that we've said
Yeah.
repeatedly. Like I
Do you
miss
feel
us.
like do you feel like that even though you deeply miss Kendra, would you say that on the other side of, having your first child, that your connection is more real than ever?
I mean, we were pretty real before. Uh
Yeah. Is it deeper?
Kendra's
Is there a deeper
yeah,
connection between you
it's a
two?
deepening for sure.
Yeah.
I think radical honesty is a foundational principle upon which we've attempted to build our entire relationship. And it's this core idea that we come back
Beautiful.
to of
That's beautiful.
radical honesty. And that's hard and frankly, a pain in the butt often. So it's been honest throughout, but there's certainly a deepening. And I think it's
Mhm.
unavoidable when you witness your partner radically shed their entire
Mhm.
identity and become this new character in the movie of your life somewhat
Mhm.
instantaneously, where it's like 10 minutes ago, you weren't the mom, but now you're breastfeeding a baby, and
Mhm.
everything in that little moment is radically different. And so there is a deepening, and I think perhaps it's a consequence or a byproduct of the level of responsibility that exists. Like now there's just more at stake. Like there's more
Yeah.
to lose, right? If we broke up before, I was talking to her the other day about divorce, and we were just cooking dinner. And so my parents split up when I was 6.
Oh yeah.
And, divorce is a thing. It's like 40% of marriages or whatever it is. And I was saying to her, you know, previously, if we would have broken up, we would have broken up, and it would have been real hard and real sad. And I would have not been okay for a while. But now, if we broke up, like the idea of not seeing my daughter
Mhm.
for 2 days, 4 days, a week, whatever it might be, is devastating. Like the idea of waking up and not seeing Kendra in bed with
Yeah.
my daughter, with my family, is just this really heartbreaking thing. And so it's given me a newfound appreciation or perspective on some
Mhm.
bigger things in life. Like our relationship to me
Okay.
matters more now because I feel like there's more to lose. And it matters more now because I need to, as you would understand, like step up and be this different person, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the grief, man, the grief arrived just like a
What?
slow trip.
Yeah, and it takes like a moment for you to like calibrate and feel like, oh, this is grief. Rilke has that line. He says, I don't have much knowledge yet in this massive darkness, so the grief makes me small. I don't have knowledge yet in this massive darkness, so the grief makes me small. And there's something about that when I think about it. So when I do have knowledge in it, the grief enlarges me, the grief expands me, it makes me bigger, right? Not bigger and better, but just more whole. And there's something about just having the awareness to recognize the messengers of grief showing up and knocking on our heart's door, taking a seat at the table and talking to us. My question would be is, looking back, what were some of the messengers or what were some of the signals that like, hey, this is grief speaking. This isn't failure. This isn't inadequacy. This isn't weakness. This isn't like a lack of strength. This is grief. What, can you think of anything?
Yeah, I'm just trying to picture. I remember just having a series of aha moments, so to speak, where it was like, oh shit, I'm grieving. Like, oh shit, like this is grief. Like putting the word to the experience, like naming the feeling.
Yeah.
It was like, oh dang, it's that. And for a while, it was like, I think I'm just confused. I think I'm just learning. I think I'm overwhelmed. I think I'm just angry and resentful. That's a whole other episode we could do about resentment. It was like, there's this like series of moments and experiences where the response that I was having to a seemingly non-important thing was disproportionate. So for example, I'm like, I got to go to the market, and as I'm walking down to the car, I'm feeling all kinds of stuff. And all I'm doing is I'm going to the market to like buy some bananas or whatever. And internally, I'm just like buzzing, angsty, kind of want to like run into the car in front of me, kind of want to light a building on fire. And these are these moments where I've trained myself to be like, hang on a minute, Jared, take a breath. What's going on? Like, this might be worthy of some exploration, right? And so it's having these various experiences that were confusing, and then I talk to people and it's like, oh, it's new fatherhood, it takes a while, everything's different, everything's changing, be gentle, be compassionate, which I completely agree with. And the moment when I had that little insight of, dang, this is grief, like this is the umbrella under which all of these other angst and emotions and sensations live, it like something clicked for me. And I think to your point about that poem, like I felt bigger, I felt stronger. I was like, oh, I'm grieving. And then it was like, oh, I'm grieving. I had a little puff in my chest. It's like, yeah, look at me go. Like, I'm not messed up. I'm not broken. I'm not wrong. Like, I'm just grieving. Man. And it felt so weird and odd and wrong to be grieving in the first month of the most amazing, miraculous thing that has happened to me. And you're holding this little bundle of heaven that's perfect. And you're just like crying and your heart's expanding. And then 5 minutes later, it's like, I feel like I'm at a funeral. I feel like I'm at my own funeral.
Yeah. And it's wildly valid.
Yeah.
Right? It's wildly valid. Yeah, I'm always curious, like the naming it is so important from my experience, because as soon as I name it, it's almost like I am now working with it. I just reclaim agency over it, right? So now it's not like I'm suppressing it or hiding it or denying it. No, suddenly I'm back in the driver's seat of this thing that's moving forward, or kind of moving forward. But I'm back in the driver's seat. I have the awareness of it. And because I have the awareness of it, I can now better understand how to dance with it, how to work with it, how to befriend it, versus not having the awareness of it, feeling all of this opposition and feeling all of this tension and all of this frustration and, these rash decisions that I'm making and these knee-jerk reactions, and feeling so loss of control. But as soon as I acknowledge that this is grief speaking in my life, oh my God, okay. It's like I'm playing a new game now, and I've got the playbook.
Yeah. You know what it feels like to me? I just had this flash of a visual as you were describing that. It feels like I'm like out in the wild, like on a hike far away from everything. And I'm like, just have this sensation that something's watching me, that like I'm being hunted. And it's like I turn around and I'm looking, but I can never find it. And then at some point, perhaps I turn and I see I don't know, a coyote or a tiger or whatever. Probably not a tiger. More likely a squirrel, to be honest. But then it's like I turn and I see it, and it's like, I see you. Like, I'm not crazy. Like, I see you. And then it's just like, it's empowering, right? And it's reassuring. Was there a single moment that you can think of to answer your own question where you like click for you?
No, I think it was more so I have learned in my life that oftentimes when grief is visiting, and I have like this real special kind of, I don't know, I would say grief is one of my greatest teachers. And I have kind of like genuinely write love letters to my grief, right? And because it's just been such a special thing in my life to just befriend my grief. And over the time, as I have learned how to dance with her, I feel like anytime grief shows up, my response is a death grip on my life. I'm chasing safety and security hard, much harder than I would normally. So I'm trying to make more money. I'm trying to book more speaking engagements. I'm trying to land more clients. I'm just like, I am obsessing over this work. And then what I realize is like, oh, I'm chasing safety and security because grief is hollowing me out. And this loss, it feels like emptiness. And that emptiness, it's a void. And even though I would say, you know, what feels very empty is actually profoundly full, you don't have that experience until you dive into your grief, right? And so naturally, my response is to avoid the hollowness, to avoid the emptiness, to avoid the loss, to avoid by trying to overcorrect, by chasing more security, trying to gain something. And so anytime I feel like I'm in that mode, and which is really just this very, very death grip on the wounded masculine, because that grief is a feminine force coming through. So I overextend myself by trying to correct it by, going to the wounded masculine and making shit happen to feel a little bit more safe and secure in my life. And so anytime I feel like that,
plan and structure and do
all the things
that
I don't naturally really do, it's like the river's already flowing. I feel like my whole journey has been teaching me that there's a river already moving. It's already flowing. My work isn't to swim upstream. My work isn't to push it. My work isn't to stand in it. My work is to learn how to rest in it so the natural current of things can just move me forward. Right? And we'll hit some bumps and we'll hit some rocks and we'll hit some edges. Like we'll tumble onto the shore here and there. But for the most part, it's effortless. And have been living into that experience over and over again. So whenever I get out of the river, it's pretty fucking palpable for me. Like it's a real visceral experience when I get out of the river. And I feel like grief is always knocking on my heart's door when that is the experience.
Yeah. I had this somatic therapist on the podcast years ago, Nicole Lowe's, and I've done a couple sessions with her, and I took her online course about nervous system regulation and somatics. And she has this wonderful analogy talking about the river and flow and capacity. And basically, if you've ever gone for a walk down a river and watched it, at some of the edges, you'll see these little eddies where it's like a little spinning thing, and everything just gets stuck in a circle. An eddy, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so she says that when you're dysregulated, you're essentially just stuck in one of these eddies and you're just spinning. And then the work, it's so true. And I remember learning this is like, because I try stuff, it doesn't work. I try stuff, it doesn't work. I try stuff, it doesn't work. And days and weeks go by, right? Dysregulated state. And her point is like, how do you manage that? How do you get back into the flow of the river? How do you notice when the eddies are starting? Of like, when you start to get sucked into those eddies, it's like, hang on, like I got to paddle the other way. And it reminds me of what you're talking about there with grief, which is essentially teaching yourself to surrender to the flow of grief and let yourself be carved open, rather than like, hang on, I got to put on my gloves and plan, do, structure,
Yeah.
structure, which is essentially just avoidance, right?
And that I'm
In
sure.
some regard.
Yeah.
It's so
And
annoying.
I think it'd be good to like take the conversation into maybe, okay, grief is real. We've acknowledged grief is real with this, but then it is this story. How do we get out of the eddies? And what that looks like for both of us. Because I would honestly say without a shadow of doubt that, and I know this is very like old ways of thinking, but as our, like the primal parts of us as a hunter gatherer, like I feel it in terms of, I got to make sure that I'm taking care of my family. And I'm not saying that my partner care also can't do that. But there is that primal part in me that wants to make sure that I can go hunt and gather and provide for us. And that grief, it can feel like such a roadblock. Like, the fuck are you nagging at me when I'm just trying to move our lives forward, trying to be a good father, trying to provide for my family, trying to do everything that is being asked of me, still show up after a hard day of work and be present with my family, love on my wife. And then I've got this nagging thing that's just like trying to reach up and pull me into the underworld. Like, what is this? And at first, for the longest time, I would work against it because I had better things to do in the name of fathering, in the name of husband work, right? I had more important things to do. As I've had this chance to see it differently by diving into the void and befriending the grief and giving her a seat at the table and having a conversation with her and asking her, what are you trying to show me? What are you trying to tell me? And doing that work, I would say now it was probably the greatest thing I could ever do when it comes to becoming a great father and a great husband, is befriending my grief.
Wow.
And because I would say like the depth that I've been willing to feel my grief creates the height of the container of love I can hold for my family. And if we aren't willing to feel the depths of our grief, we have very little capacity to feel greater love for our family.
Yeah.
Right. And to really be the father that we're capable of becoming. And so as I have followed that thread into the underworld and have continuously allowed the grief to have her way with me, right, that has expanded me so that I can emerge out on the other side on the land of renewal with this expanded capacity of greater love, greater joy, also a internal strength that allows me to hold the complexity of today and the uncertainty of tomorrow with less fear and less worry, allowing me to be more present in the now and experience the joy that's available now. That single experience with my grief transformed my experience of life.
I'm going to drop a Khalil Gibran line on you right now. Since you name dropped Rilke earlier, I had to I got to do it too. So one of my favorite Khalil Gibran lines, who wrote a book called The Prophet, which is top 3 for me.
Yeah.
It says, the more that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. It's so good.
That's it.
It's, again, so obnoxious.
That's what it is. Yeah.
So, because you touched on this idea of what I relate to as just overwhelm. It's like, okay, cool. I got a job. I got to make money. I got to do chores. I got to look after myself. I got health. I got to eat. I got to poop. I got to shower. I got to do all these things. I got to be a good partner. I have a baby I have to keep alive. And all this is happening. And I feel like I'm juggling plates and chainsaws. And then meanwhile, there's this little gremlin in the corner called grief. It's like, hey, yo, I'm going to keep growing larger and larger and louder until you figure out a way to put some of that down or to pause some of that and pay attention to me. It's like a little grief gremlin tantrum, right? And my experience is that thing is unavoidable indefinitely. It's like it just is persistent, and until you sit down and make time and space. And so when I hear you talk about befriending grief, what I think of is you creating time and space to go and sit and feel and listen to what grief has to say. But that was actually my second surprise question, was going to be something along the lines of, how do you make space for grief? Like, what is your process? And you touched on writing a love letter to grief, but
Yeah.
What else do you
I
do? How do you
I
how do you pull it off?
I humanize my emotions. So grief,
What do you
like
mean?
definitely, like I give her a name, and it's like this thing. It's you create like
What's
kind of
the
what's known.
what's the name?
What's that? I call
What's the
her
name?
Queen.
Queen.
Yeah, because
Is,
she's just
does she
always
have a
been like
voice?
what's that?
Is she
No, she
British?
had
Does she have a
not a voice, but it's just more so like when I'm talking to grief, when I'm having like, I do it with like my longing too. I live with such deep longing. And for the longest years, that unanswered longing has been the opposition that I've been trying to outwork. But now I realize that the unanswered longing is just this deep knowing, this part of me that remembers my wholeness. And so that there is my conversations with my longing, my conversations with my grief are just very much like how we're talking right now. Like, what am I missing? What are you trying to show me? Right. And I'll just do these free form kind of, journaling, handwriting journaling sessions of what is the loss that I'm feeling right now. And then in response, it's me saying, even though you're taking me by the hand and you are pulling me into some of the most unimaginable dark places, I know that the darkness is here to remother me. I know that the darkness is here to take me from the lap of my mother and to sit me on the lap of the great mother. I know that the darkness is here to expand my capacity, right, to befriend the darkness. And I know that when I'm willing to sit in the darkness for as long as it takes, I can see the light. Right? And so I'm writing a letter to her saying that I don't know where you're taking me. I don't know how deep you're going to take me. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I trust you. Here's all the reasons why I trust you. Because I know in 2020 when this happened, I know in 2022 when this happened, I know when this happened, you took me to the edge of the cliff and I leaned over, but I never fell. But I experienced an aliveness that I have never experienced before, not in spite of you, but because of you. And so it's just very much this, I don't know, this just like conversation with this part of me, this experience that otherwise just stays kind of trapped, swirling around, but it's no shape, no form. It's kind of elusive. We feel it here and there. It's unsettling, and we numb ourselves and we distract ourselves and we move on from it. But it doesn't go. It's like you said, it's just growing strong and stronger and stronger, right? And the next thing you know, it comes out sideways. And so
Yeah.
I think that has always been a big part for me. And secondly, and this was actually one of my questions for you. So here, I'll just ask you this question. If you do, how do you invite Kendra into your grief?
Yeah, I mean, often short answer is with a lot of resistance.
Honest, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just being frankly, unwillingly, stubbornly. I'm getting better at that. And one thing that came up for me just then was this idea that in the how do I say this? That uncertainty breeds anxiety, right? And so you
Mm-hmm.
talked about this
Mm-hmm.
swirling, these stories, and what is it? And I don't know. And I find that the uncertainty breeds anxiety, and that when I can name it, it's like, oh, I'm grieving. It's like, oh, now I'm certain. There's some certainty there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so with Kendra, I think like love, like connection, like vulnerability, there's just this ongoing reminder for me that the things that I often avoid or shame about myself are the ways that we actually deepen connection and provide
Absolutely.
the thing that we actually want. But
That's it, man.
so, for example, if I am vulnerable and tell Kendra A, B, or C, then I will push her away, but she will think less of me and she'll leave me, and my life will, where will I move? And I get really bogged down in the details. Like, I'm very good about fantasizing catastrophes,
Oh, yeah.
right? I think this is perhaps a human thing, but it's
Yes.
like, well, what days of the week would I want to visit my daughter? Probably Tuesday. And it's like, yo, bro, what are you doing? Go and have a conversation. Like,
Yep.
so we just maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 days ago, made some time to go on a walk. And for years, Kendra and I have gone on walks and found that it's much easier for us to connect. And I've seen this repeatedly. I take people on these long Spanish walks for 10 days every year, and you're moving in the same direction. You're not making eye contact. Stuff is happening. So you could walk faster if there's an energy. You could walk a little slower if you're more withdrawn. And so there's this movement that creates connection. And so we went for this walk to talk about something else. And at some point we stopped and she made eye contact and said, hey, I feel this, this, and this. And I just found myself feeling so numb. And for about the week prior, I just felt numb and full and empty at the same time. But what I'm recognizing more and more is that when I feel numb, or like I mentioned to her, I'm like, I don't know what's going on with me right now. Like I Googled postpartum depression for the first time. Like, I'm like, am I depressed? Like I listened to an episode on a podcast about postpartum depression. I've never been depressed. I've never had that. But I'm like, I just feel like something is happening here that escapes my current understanding. And so she was sharing very openly and very vulnerably about something. And I just found myself standing there like numb. And she, like I wasn't there. Like I was physically there, but energetically, emotionally, I was just not connecting with her. And she could feel that because she's a heart antenna. Yeah. And so that led to a conversation, which at some point I just like pulled the cork out and just started rambling, like stream of consciousness style, for a couple minutes. And basically through that process came around to this idea of like I'm not depressed. Like I'm just full. Like I'm so full of emotion and stories and feelings that haven't been expressed because I'm too busy. I have too much on my plate and I have too many plates to spin. And I was like, oh, like I actually feel underappreciated. And like I feel like unacknowledged, and I feel like I am failing you. I feel like I'm a bad dad. I feel like I'm a bad partner. I feel like I'm letting you down. I feel like the longer this goes on, the more worried I am that we're drifting apart, that our relationship is going to deteriorate. Like this is not sustainable. And I was just kind of rambling and ranting all this. And to her great credit, which is why I love her and why she's such a good person and a partner, she heard it and was like, move it. Like I brought up some very specific things. And she's like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm so sorry.
Beautiful.
And I could see how that would have affected you and I can do better. And for me, from my perspective, I could see her having a hard time being a mom and this new identity and grieving her own life. And I was sort of recognizing that I had this subtle codependent pattern or protective mechanism whereby it's like, I don't want to ask her for more because I already see her stretched, right? And one of the things that she said that was so beautiful was like, hey, this is you calling me forward, and this is you inviting me to own my shit and to step up and to grow and to expand right there along with you. And so basically, long story short, I find that I invite her in not so elegantly, or perhaps not as elegantly and as easily as I would like, but I feel like grief is a skill. And in the same way that communication is a skill, in the same way that relationships require skills, and then I'm getting better at that. Yeah. And so I think also like discomfort is a skill. Like you can learn to be uncomfortable, you know? So yeah, that's my long rambling answer.
No, I
that
think
makes
it's
sense.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Absolutely. It made sense. Hell yeah.
All right.
Hell yeah,
bro.
Yeah, it made sense. It was beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. You know, I'm saying that because one of the ways I do work through my grief is I bring it to my wife as well. I don't project it. I don't vomit it, but it's, hey, and this is a little trick that I've learned, especially when you have a partner who is a new mom or mothering or has just, you know, tons of plates that she or he is spinning as well. Our natural tendency is like, hey, you're my partner. You should be here for me. So let me just verbally vomit on you without taking into account that my wife has had her nipple pulled on this entire day from a baby and she is exhausted and she smells like breast milk and she hasn't eaten or bathed in 2 days. It's this simple little question that I ask her now that says, hey, long day. I get it. Can you let me know when you have a little bandwidth to talk about
Yeah,
something that I'm processing right now? Right.
for
And that
sure.
just is like, for her, be like, oh, honey, I'm like, let's do it now. I'm good. Or, hey, babe,
Yeah.
let's reconvene tomorrow morning whenever the kids have their first nap, and let's talk then after I shower. I'm like, okay, great. Right. That has like, in and of itself, eliminated so many arguments, because it's like, let me verbally vomit. You don't show up the way that I expect you to show up. God damn it. You're never here for me.
Yeah. I
And
really
it just never
I want
stops.
to
Yeah.
highlight that, reaffirm, second that notion. Like that idea is vital for every relationship
Yeah.
dynamic. It's like, hey, where are you at? Like, do you have space right now for me
Mm-hmm.
to talk? Like, do you have space? Do you have capacity? Like, are you good? Rather
Yeah.
than just like, oh, Kendra just got out of the bathtub and I just rant for 5 minutes about, my sadness. It's like, no, 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 no. So you have to make space for the grief. You have
Yeah.
to set
Yeah.
the table for these conversations. And
Mm.
I think that, to your point, is I'm often like, I'm a big fan of efficiency, and I've learned that, hey, if I could just ask a question or two here or there, or bite my tongue here or there, like that will save me in the long
Yeah. A
run
lot.
many, many minutes of conversation, backtracking, apologizing, etc. And so just this idea of, hey, I'd love to talk to you about something. There's something
Yeah.
on my mind. It's not an emergency, but like, do you have space right now? Or can you let me
Yeah.
know when you have capacity, like,
Yeah.
for that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Yeah. And then the other thing that my wife, like Kara, I'm so grateful, because I feel like when men primarily bring grief or pain or something to their spouse, and I'm not saying this is everyone, of course, but I have known many men, and Brene Brown actually, I think, talked about this. It's the idea of falling off the white horse, and women being threatened by men who have fallen off the white horse, or however
Mm.
she said that. I might not be saying that exactly correct, but this idea of like, when I bring my grief that is just riddled with uncertainty, right? And heaviness and sorrow. The shaky ground that I'm standing on is also shaky ground that she's standing on. Right? When I'm bringing it to her, when I'm talking about this grief, like, it undoubtedly affects her. And it could be so easy for her to feel threatened by that. She knows bills have to get paid. She knows that, we're trying to get our daughter into this school and it costs this. She knows all of this stuff. And so when she sees me on shaky ground, she could feel threatened by that. And suddenly she could shut it down and be like, you're stronger than this. I know that you can handle this. Like, you've gone through harder things in your life, just to like try to reinforce that wounded masculine in me to keep going, so that she can feel more safe and secure in her life.
Right.
Thankfully, as I am bringing this grief to her, she is in it with me, because she also has seen that, again, when I dance with grief, the renewal on the other side. Who is it? Francis Welder. He says that, grief is the great alchemy that transmutes our pain and suffering and turns it into a new seed, and plants that seed into the solid soil, or fertile soil, so that we can experience new life.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the alchemy that transmutes our pain and our suffering into a seed, plants that seed in fertile soil, so that we can have new life. And I think my wife, and she knows that on the other side of me bringing this grief to her is renewal, right? Unknowing when it's going to come, but that's the way it
Yeah.
works. And there is renewal there. And so she will hold the tension of that uncertainty as I'm in it with me, and not force me to get back onto that white horse and save the day, to save our family. And I think there's just,
Right.
my God, I have just seen so many men who have tried to open it up, and they're met with that. And they mean well. They totally mean well, right? This isn't a dig on women or men, because we both sides do it, right? The partner, not gender inclusive, like the partner means very well, but it's just wildly damaging.
Yeah. It's the equivalent of, 'cause I could see both sides, of like wanting to give us a pep talk and get me back on
Out of
get
love.
back on that horse. Like, you're such a good rider. You're the best knight in the land. Like, I believe. Remember, you won that jousting tournament. Like, don't you forget that you're the whatever,
Yep.
Camelot guy. And
Yep.
it's like, yeah. And sometimes you fall off the horse, just to continue
Yeah.
this analogy. And it's like, yo, I'm bleeding. right now. Like, can we tend to this giant gash on my knee before you get me back on this horse? Like, I need a moment. Like, I need some bandage. I need a doctor. I need a hug. Like, there's not a rush right now. And I feel like sometimes the rushing relates to a discomfort in the partner with the emotions that they're experiencing, right?
Yes.
And so to your point is the partner's feeling that fragile, uncertain ground, the instability is like, am I okay? And if you don't feel okay with emotions, if you don't feel okay with what's happening, it makes total sense that you're like, no. Like, I'm going to take a shortcut. We got to get you back on this horse right now, man.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm going to bypass this. I'm going to pep talk you. And so I think for all of us, there's, it's part of why we do this personal development work is to be more comfortable feeling uncomfortable, right? And so when our people and our partners come to us feeling tender and vulnerable and scared and overwhelmed and inadequate, we can sit in that space and like receive and hold and be like, your knee's bleeding real bad, bro. Like, it's real bad. Like, but I got a bandage here and like, we'll get you on the horse. But like right now, the other side of that is like, get your ass off that horse. Like, your knee's bleeding. Like, no, get back down here. Let me have a look at that thing. And it's like, because I do that too. I'm like, I'm fine. I just I gotta go do a thing. Like, I'm fine. And Kendra's just like, sees right through that. Yeah. Sure cares the same.
Like, very much the same.
You're not fooling anybody.
I just feel this right now too. I guarantee there's somebody listening right now that can identify with that story. And if that is you, right? It's not about preventing ruptures in our life. It's about repairing the rupture. I can only imagine how healing it could be if you maybe were the one that has shut down one side of the party out of your own fear of the uncertainty and unpredictability, that this person's grief was kind of attached to. How healing it would be to like own that and to repair that rupture and to say, hey, I'm just maybe so sorry that I dismissed the pain and the loss that you have been navigating as a new father, as a new mother. And I just want you to know that I'm somebody who will always strive to do better and be a safe space to hear what you're going through. Because if one of us wins, we both lose.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And to my story earlier where Kendra owned it and said, like, I'm so sorry. And I was like looking off into the woods and she like made sure that we had eye contact and was like,
look at me in the eyes.
I was like, just like my like, oh God, emotion. Just like, it's like, I'm so sorry. And it just felt like this soothing balm wash over me. Of like, man, I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. Right. I didn't realize how medicinal that little phrase was until it happened. And so a powerful question I often use with people when I do workshops is like, what do you need to hear right now?
So good.
Right.
That's so good.
Get things prompting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so how we feeling? Was that grief?
I love
it.
Just
nail it?
I think it's a good conversation. We could probably keep going, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of time. That's been nearly an hour.
Has it really?
Yeah. 55 minutes.
Well, I guess now when we put this out, I guess we can get some feedback. So if you enjoyed the quick conversation on grief, please let us know.
Couple dads going deep.
Coming soon, a grief workshop for a low price of $97.
If you're interested in grief, have I got news for you? My 6 razzle dazzle grief eradication tips for only 7 payments of $842.99.
Yeah, no, it's if you want to accelerate your grieving process so that you can find renewal faster.
Get you back on that horse. But for real, though, I know you've mentioned Francis Weller, who we both are huge fans of. He's been on the podcast as well. If you're listening, go and listen to that. He's so good. What resources would you direct people to? Are there anything that jumped out?
Yeah, I think, honestly, if you have not read The Wild Edge of Sorrow yet, I think that is just something that's just profoundly beautiful. And And it also is just an incredible starting point to better understand your grief and how grief, extends beyond just personal loss, right? There's so many other, he talks about the 5 gates of grief. There's so many other gates of grief that we absorb and we feel. And if we're not actually aware of these different gates of grief and how they impact our lives, we can take that on as our own thing. And we're trying to fix something that doesn't even need to be fixed. Right? But it's just this invitation to deepen our relationship with self, to deepen our relationship with others, and to really deepen our relationship with the more than human world. I mean, so the wild of just sorrow is something that I am, handing out for Christmas presents yearly.
Yeah. One thing I did years ago was me and a bunch of buddies work through his audio series. The Alchemy of Initiation, I think, is one.
Good.
There's
one of my
there's a
favorite.
couple. He just lights out
good.
just on another level, this guy.
Yeah. So good.
And I think, just to reiterate, one thing that I've learned about grief is that it's not necessarily the loss of a person through death,
thank you.
But it can be the loss of anything, whether that's a dream, an old life, free time, hugs, morning cuddles. Like,
it's that ambiguous loss.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the trickiest to identify, or it has been for me.
Like,
dang, grieving the loss of Sunday morning.
Yeah. I was just working with somebody who had been a president of an organization for 25 years and moving on. And it's like this tendency just to rush into the next thing without like, there's so much grief inside of you walking away from this role, even though you are the one wanting to walk away. And I'm not asking you to go dig for something that's not pressing up against you or not an edge right now. But I am saying, let's create a ritual. Let's have a little ceremony to honor this season of life, right? And all of the parts of you that helped make this season of life real. And it was just this beautiful ceremony of honoring this season of life, which really is what creates the space for this next evolution of expansion. Not so that we have to make it happen, so that we can receive, right? We have the space to receive what is trying to come into our lives.
Amen. Caleb Campbell, you're the best, dude. I love talking to you.
You, my guy.
And
Same. Appreciate you.
I'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes. And if you're listening, Caleb's been on the podcast a couple times. Good.
A lot of growth between then and now, but I love the conversations with you always. It's so much.
Look at us, just dads now, just doing dad life.
Man, yeah, they're your accelerator. Just have a baby.
I did selling a program, and then they start the program, and you're like, just have a baby, bro.
Just have a baby.
Just do it. Yeah. All right. That's perfect.
Too good, man.
To leave
I appreciate you.
Awful advice. All right. Love you, bro. Okay. So that was Dad's Dive Deep with my buddy Caleb Campbell talking about grief. Let me know what you think. Was this good? Did it help you? Did you like it? Do you have an idea or suggestion for us to improve it, to make it better, to enhance it? It's the first time that we've done it. We thought it was a good idea. We thought it had some legs, and so we're taking it out for a little test drive. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. As mentioned previously, there are various links in the show notes. You can talk to Caleb. You can get Francis Weller's book. You can find ways to work with me, walk with me in Spain if you want. I do coaching, keynotes, etc. Anyway, this is not an advertisement for me, but this is a thank you for listening. Thanks for being great. Thanks for giving us an hour of your life. And do let me know what you think. I would love to hear from you.